Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's keynote presentation titled Conditions Favoring the Production and Promotion of Scientific Innovation. This webinar is part of the 12th annual event in the Neuroscience Virtual Event Series. I'm Cassie Soltman of LabRoots, and I'll be your moderator for today's event. Today's educational web seminar is presented by LabRoots. Before we begin, I would like to remind everyone that this event is interactive. We encourage you to first participate by communicating with other attendees using our live chat feature during the presentation. You can find the live chat located at the bottom left of your screen. You can also participate by submitting as many questions as you would like during the presentation. To do so, simply type them into the Ask a Question box and click Submit. We'll answer as many questions as we have time for at the end of the presentation. If you have any trouble seeing or hearing the presentation, please also click on the Help Desk button from the lobby within the event. Finally, as a reminder, this presentation is educational and offers free continuing education credits. Click on the Continuing Education Credits image located on the right of your screen and follow the process to obtain your credits. Now let's get started. I'll now present today's speaker, Brian Uzzi, Richard L. Thomas Professor of Leadership, Kellogg School of Management and Organizations Department, co-director, Northwestern Institute on Complex Systems at Northwestern University. For a complete biography on our speaker, please find it on the left of your screen. Brian, you may now begin your presentation.
Hello, everyone. Many thanks to the organizers for inviting me here today and for all of you for spending a little bit of your time with me. I'm not going to talk about neuroscience. I don't do neuroscience. I'm not a neuroscientist. But I have been studying the science of science, and I'd like to share with you two findings that I hope will help enhance your own scientific work and your practice around coming up with better scientific ideas and how to get others to see the value of those ideas. You know, in science, we all want innovation, and there's generally two steps involved in that, and we rarely get any kind of training in how to come up with more innovative ideas and how to be able to convey them to others. I'd like to talk about those two processes today. And in doing so, I'm going to share with you two research projects that try to get at the essence of both the production of more innovative and high impact knowledge and how you could go conveying that better idea to other people who can support you. I'm going to start by talking about the production of better ideas. And there's many different ways in which you can look at this. Scientists have been looking at this problem in science for quite some time. People have focused on things like how much money do you have, what is the talent of the people you're working with, the diversity of skills of people on teams. And there's one area that hasn't really been looked at as much as it's been talked about, and that's really how does the gender diversity of a team relate to the innovativeness of the ideas that the team comes up with and the citation impact of those ideas. I'd like to talk about this problem today and recognize my collaborators who are on the project with me, Ben Jones, Tanya Tian, Teresa Woodruff, and Yang Yang. Let's get into the problem. So there's two things that are coming together around this problem. One is gender diversity, and the other is these scientific ideas. So how might you think about this? Teamwork in science is one part of it, and gender in science is in another. So let's start with the teamwork part. So you probably know that almost all work in science today is being done in teams. And in medical science in particular, the amount of work done in teams is increasing, as is the size of teams, as you can see from this plot. In STEM papers, basically in the last 35 years, the size of teams is more than doubled in the STEM sciences. So teams dominate science. We got to learn more about them if you want to be successful then. We also know that specialization is one of the things that helps teams work, and teams help specialization come together by, helping other people on the team overcome their blind spots through looking at the problem in different ways. And we know that diversity of specialization and backgrounds can help teamwork. However, teams also have quite a lot of process losses that go along with them. And one of the things that everyone's looking for in understanding teams is how do you get the best things out of them while minimizing some of the process losses. So as much as teams can be a very powerful means for producing knowledge, we really still have many things that we don't know about them, particularly in the ways the world has changed around us. Gender in science has also gone through a transformation in the last 20 years. Women have entered science in increasingly greater numbers. Many of you already know this. In some fields, science now has, some branches of science have more women applying to them than men. Psychology is an example of that. Nonetheless, with the influx of women into science, there's still a large gap in the perception of the skills of men and women scientists. Globally, different surveys around the world show that on average, people responding to the skill differences of men and women scientists find that men basically have somewhere between 11% and 15% better skills than women. Here's a map that shows some of that. North America is the bright red, and that shows that basically North Americans, on average, when you poll people in science and outside of science, people related to work in science, the individuals that were surveyed here, as you get somewhere between 11 and 15%. Europe does a little bit better. Emerging large science areas like China do about the same as the US. India does a little bit worse. Now, as much as teamwork is important and gender diversity is important, there have been very few studies that have brought the two concepts together. Surprisingly, very few studies have looked at how gender diversity on a scientific team is associated with the success of that team. Most studies of gender in science have really worked at comparing men versus women rather than looking at their joint capabilities together. And that's what I would like to look at in this paper. To drill into this, here's the basic overview. Basically want to look at how the gender composition of a team is linked to its innovativeness and its impact. I'll define those terms in a moment. Our approaches, we're going to investigate the performance of gender diverse teams relative to gender homogeneous teams. So mixed gender teams versus all male versus all female teams are going to be our comparisons. It's going to be a very large data study. We're going to go back for 20 years and we're going to look at nearly every paper that has been published in the last 20 years. It comes up to something about 27 million papers. We're very busy in science, as you can see. Those 27 million papers are written by about 7 million authors in 18 different disciplines. This data comes from one of the large repositories of bibliographic data called the Web of Science. Here are some of the key findings. So I'm going to tell you right away what we find and why it's important. And then I'm going to talk about how we get to these conclusions. One, mixed gender teams publish papers that are more innovative and higher impact. Mixed gender teams strongly generalize in this effect. And when I say effect, I don't mean a causal effect, I mean an observational one, in this team diversity effect across the sciences. So I'm going to focus on an area closest to neuroscience, which is the medical sciences. And then I'm going to take everything that we learned from that, and I'm going to expand it to looking at all the other disciplines. But we're going to look at your area first. Now, one of the things that comes from this that's particularly important is, as much as gender diverse teams are associated with the kind of impact and innovation that we want from scientists, they tend to be deeply underutilized in science, which means that science is leaving quite a lot of money on the table, so to speak, in terms of being able to produce breakthroughs faster by understanding the relationship between mixed gender teams and success. So let's get into the data and measures. Sorry, I got a little mixed up here with this system. So let's talk about data and measures. Let's jump right into it. So I'm going to look at the medical sciences, and it's going to look at everything that's been published in the medical sciences from 2000 to 2019. I'm going to look at 6.6 million articles, which is generally the medical sciences, 15,000 journals, 3.2 million women authors, and 4.4 million men authors. And after I talk about the medical sciences, the areas probably most closely related to what the audience is involved in here, I'm then going to see if it generalizes to 18 other disciplines, which is going to include 20 million additional papers. So let's start with the outcome variables. What do you want to keep in mind? We're going to look at two aspects of team success. One is hit papers. So is the paper created by mixed gender teams versus same gender teams more likely to be in the 5% of hit papers or not. We're then going to look at the innovativeness of the papers that are produced by mixed gender teams versus same gender teams. And here our measure of innovativeness is pretty straightforward. Innovativeness comes about when scientists in their papers put together ideas that have rarely been put together before. That's what makes them novel and innovative, versus scientists who put papers together based on ideas that have already been put together in previous work and tend to be familiar to scientists. So we're going to look at this scale from what you would call conventional papers all the way up to novel papers, where the novel papers are combining knowledge in a unique way. Predictive variables. We're going to look at whether a team is mixed gender, simple 0 or 1. Does it have men and women on it or not? And then we're going to look at a continuous variable that allows us to see just what is the percentage of men and women on the team. We're going to look at a lot of controls in this analysis. Why? Because, citation analysis has a lot of potential predictors. I'm not going to go through all of these, but what I do want to bring out to you is that we're going to look at the size of the team. We're going to measure aspects of team diversity directly. So what's the diversity of expertise on the team, age diversity, internationalism of the team, the prestige rank of the university that the authors are at, average prior citations. We're going to look at the authors' networks outside the team, career age, gender, and we're going to put in a lot of fixed effects to control for the journal and the year and the author, which means we're trying to control for many things with those variables that we can't directly control for. But if they're a fixed aspect of that team, we are in fact controlling for it. So we might not be controlling for an individual's ethnicity, but the individual fixed effects will control for that because ethnicity is something that's fixed about the individual researcher. Now, let's get into some findings. First of all, I want to look at three things in descriptive findings, three things. One, I want to look at how teams are changing in the medical sciences. I want to look at the growing frequency of mixed gender teams. And then I want to look at whether the frequency of mixed gender teams is what you'd expect if people assemble teams without any attention to gender diversity at all. So let's start with the first area. Big teams dominate. So on the x-axis, I'm showing you the years from 2000 to 2020, and I'm breaking my teams down into 6 different sizes. Solo teams all the way up to 6 or more team members. And what you can see is the red line is the one that really captures your attention because it's the one that's been growing and growing extremely rapidly over time. That is teams, in the medical sciences that are made up of 6 or more researchers. So one of the things to see here is that not only are teams dominating medical science, but large teams dominate medical science. You could also see that teams are in fact becoming more mixed gendered over time. Each one of these decades that goes by, we have growth in terms of the percentage of teams that are made up of mixed genders. And the larger the team, the more likely it is to be made up of mixed genders. The next analysis, however, puts some of the mixed gender growth in perspective. What we did here was we took all the mixed gender teams that we could observe in the database, and then we made a whole bunch of artificial teams by just putting men and women together without the attention to gender. So we just randomized this whole network of teams. And the bottom line here is that anything below this negative 0.05 line says that mixed gender teams are occurring at a frequency lower than you'd expect simply by chance, which means that there tends to be a tendency for people to assemble teams that are not mixed gender, given the number of men and women that you could possibly put together. So if I look at this, teams are mid-size here. I'm looking at the year 2000. I'm looking at the dark green dot. And what that is telling me is that teams made up of 4 people occur 10% less often than you would expect simply by chance. So although mixed gender teams may be valuable, we haven't figured that out yet, we do know that they are being underutilized. So let's go to the next slide and actually look at the results in terms of innovation and impact. Let's start with innovation, our novelty measure. So the way to look at this plot is on the x-axis we have team size from size 2 to 6 or more, and then on the y-axis we have the probability of the paper being novel. This gray line is the base rate of novelty in the data set. Now what you can see here is that the mixed gender teams are the red line and same gender teams are the black line. And what this is saying is that at any size team, mixed gender teams, that is teams made up of both men and women, are more likely to come up with novel and innovative ideas than teams that are made up of either all men or all women. If we were to break this down a little bit, one of the things you'd see here is that for the modal size team, which is 6 or more, mixed gender teams have a 10% lift in their novelty expectation than the same gender teams. That's an awfully big amount, because if you start to think about all the papers you write and you're getting a 10% increase, that really does compound to a very big difference in the value of your work. Another way to look at it is a same gender team must be doubled in size to achieve the same novelty as a mixed gender team. That means same gender teams of size 6 would have to have 12 people on them to have the same novelty that you would get out of a 6-person mixed gender team. So it's really doubling if you look at it in those terms. Now let's go to impact. Novelty's great, but we care about are the things that are novel really changing the way people think. So let's look at impact. Impact again here is papers in the top 5%. We're looking at team size on the x-axis, and we're looking at probability of it being a hit on the y-axis. And again, the red line is above the black line at every team size. And again, this comes from a large regression where I'm controlling for all of the things that I talked about on the previous slide. So what you can see here is that basically you double your probability of a highly cited paper when you use mixed gender teams for the modal size of teams, which is 6 or more. Let's take another look at these results now. And one of the things that might be going through your mind is, and you'd be right if you're thinking about this, I mean, this is your area, is that medical sciences is really pretty diverse. Neuroscience is going to be different than cardiology, is going to be different than anesthesiology. Does this really apply to all areas of medical science? And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you a new plot where I take the previous plot and I rerun it for every subfield within medical science. And what you're going to see is the results generalize across areas of subspecialty areas of medical science. So if you look at just the top panel, I'm showing you novelty again. Each one of these scatter points represents one of the 45 different medical subfields, and anything above the dashed line and in dark green represents a significant relationship like I showed you on the previous plot. And what you can see here is the vast majority of subfields do in fact follow the same pattern as the previous slide, which is if you're in a mixed gender team versus a same gender team, your probability of writing a novel paper goes up by 10%, and your probability of having a hit paper doubles. It's also the case that if I break down those 45 different disciplines by impact, I get a similar pattern. But again, what we see is the majority of fields are showing the same pattern as the general findings. Let's go one step further now. And we've established this relationship between mixed gender teams and novelty and impact. Let's see if it applies to other scientific fields like economics, like engineering, like physics, like chemistry, biology. That's what I'm going to show you on this next slide. I'm now going to take the results that we have for medical science. I'm going to mix that together with another 20 million papers that represent the papers written from 2000 to 2020 in other scientific disciplines. And I'm going to run the same regression to see if, in fact, we find the same powerful patterns between diverse gender teams and success. Here is the first one again for novelty. And the bottom line here is red line is above the black line. Mixed gender teams do better than same gender teams at every team size. And the greater the team size, the more important gender diversity appears to be in giving you a lift over same gender teams. If we now look at impact, we find out that impact is the same relationship. Red is always above black and significantly above it. And the larger the team, the greater the relationship between mixed gender teams and scientific impact. This would suggest that no matter what branch of science you're in, especially medical science, that mixed gender teams are a vehicle for producing more novel and higher impact work. The last thing that I wanted to show you here before we move to how do you convey these great ideas to others is one alternative explanation for this is it's not really the team, but it's the relationships the people on the team have to their other co-authors and collaborators, because they're the ones that give the people on the team the ideas that they could use while working on the team. And so what we did here is we looked at different measures of each team member's network. So we looked at the network diversity, the size of the network, the range of the network, age diversity in the network. And the bottom line here is that even if you control for all these different aspects of relationships that people have on a team, a mixed gender team continues to have a significant impact on the success of the team. Yes, controlling for these other things can weaken the effect of mixed gender teams, but mixed gender teams continue to be significant. So it's a great takeaway to know that mixed gender teams do figure quite prominently in producing better outcomes in science. So let me leave you with just 3 takeaways. One is mixed gender teams are an untapped, broadly generalized resource in science. Why do I say it's untapped? Because as I already showed you in a previous slide, mixed gender teams occur less frequently than they can. They're occurring less than you'd expect by chance. That means science may in fact be leaving a valuable resource on the table for improving breakthroughs. Gender diverse teams are underrepresented, as I just mentioned, and then can lead to faster advances and better DEI. Finally, network and collaborative relationships appear to play an important role as well. So, what do you want to remember here? Mixed gender teams can be a real way to help you improve your science simply by understanding how to better assemble your teams together. Now, with that said, I'd like to go to the second stage of innovation. Innovation is really about generating ideas and then getting others to see the merits of your good ideas. And in this study, I'd like to talk about ways to help you have others see the merits of your bright ideas. I have 3 co-authors on this paper, Hao Peng, Sophie Cui, and Henrik Fosse. So let's think about innovation again. As I've already mentioned, innovation has 2 steps. How do you come up with ideas? Which one of those would be diverse gender teams, and the other is communicating these bright ideas to other people. We know more about the generative stage, things like mentorship matter, the culture of the team, funding, and other aspects of teams, including the ones that we just talked about. By contrast, we know much, much less about the communication process. We don't really know how scientists communicate the merits of their good ideas once they've been generated, and it's a complex problem. It's rarely researched and rarely taught to researchers. A better understanding of this could also help promote innovation. One example of how this understanding could have supercharged science in the past comes from analyses of Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin wrote The Origin of Species. Many people believe it, along with Einstein's work, are probably the 2 most important scientific contributions of the last 2 centuries. I mean, thoughts about evolution have really changed the way all branches of science thinks. But Darwin, in his own writings, talked about although he had these great ideas, his lack of an understanding of how to effectively communicate them really postponed the publishing of his ideas for over 10 years. Other Nobel Prize winners, such as Ronald Coase, has talked about the same idea. So, what do we want to think of? How do we want to go about thinking about this problem? Well, let me give you a study of our research overview and then jump into the data and the results. So, I want to talk about the research puzzle. I want to talk about literature that's been written on written communication. There's other ways in which to communicate that could be through diagrams and symbols. I'm going to focus on written communication, and then I'd like to talk about our research project. So, a research puzzle is really how do scientists communicate the merits of their good ideas. And the place that I want to start in thinking about this is really with getting research funding and grants. Why? Because research funding for grants is really the main vehicle by which scientists take their aspirational ideas and convert them into actionable practices or inventions. So if we can understand how communicating your ideas in grants works, it can help the rest of the downstream science production process. So we're going to begin with looking at grants. I'm going to look at written communication, and of the different ways in which you could talk about written communication, I want to talk about something called promotional language. So promotional language is basically language words that linguists believe increase people's cognitive attention to the material they're reading and also the cognitive processing of it. So these promotional words have the ability to focus people's attention, grab it and focus it, but also increase their processing of it. Examples of this promotional language are words that engage this more deep cognitive processing relative to synonyms that have the same meaning. So importance is a relatively neutral word in terms of engaging people's cognitive attention, but synonyms such as compelling, critical, crucial, essential, indispensable, significant, timely are synonyms for importance, but believed to be promotional words that engage that cognitive attention. And what I'm interested in is how does the use of these promotional words in a grant become associated with the success of the researchers with that grant. Another thing to see with these promotional words that make them special is that some work by Milner, who created and validated a dictionary, 139 promotional words, the dictionary that we're going to use in our study, also shows that these promotional words have grown at an incredible meteoric pace. In the last 35 years, the use of these promotional words has more than doubled in grants, and specifically in 1 million NIH grants that were funded between 1985 and the year 2020. And this growth is validated relative to the use of these words in previous grants and in general scientific writings during the same period. We also did some very extensive validation tests of the Milner Dictionary ourselves. I won't have time to go into that, but happy to talk about it in the Q&A. Now, let's get to the last part of the setup and then jump into the findings. So here's what we want to do. We want to look at grants, and we want to see if the percentage of promotional language in a grant is associated with or predicts whether that grant gets funded or not, whether that promotional language reflects the underlying inherent novelty of the ideas in the grant, using the same novelty measure that I used in the previous study. And then I want to look at the citation impact of the papers written based on the funding from that grant. So does promotional language in a grant improve your chances of funding? Does it reflect a true underlying innovativeness? And is it a forecaster of the impact, citation impact, that papers written off that grant will have in the future? I'm going to look at 12,000 funded and unfunded grants. One of the really distinctive things we felt about this research project is that almost all research that had been done on grants in the past has looked at funded grants, which creates a tremendous selection bias. We were able to put together over 12,000 funded and unfunded grants so that we know the text of the grant when it was submitted, both for funded and unfunded grants, and we could then analyze our three outcome variables for both funded and unfunded grants, overcoming this problem of previous grant studies. I'm going to tell you in advance that we were very surprised by the findings. Promotional language predicts whether you get funding or not. It predicts the true, underlying, and inherent nature of the innovativeness of the grant itself. So people use more promotional words, the more innovative the grant actually is. And we're going to look and find that it does predict citation impact. So let's jump into data and methods and then get to the findings. So what happened here? Okay, got it. Sorry about that. So what does our data set look like? So we're going to use data from three major granting agencies, all big, all high impact. Many of them are celebrated for the contributions they've made to great ideas in science. First one we're going to look at, and our largest sample comes from the Novo Nordisk Foundation in Europe. They're a Danish foundation. They're one of the largest in the world in terms of funding science. They're on par with like the Gates Foundation. They've given over $120 billion to scientific research. We've got 13,000 grants from them over the period of 2015 to 2022. So you can see just how many grants they do, in fact, give out a year. They work basically in areas of medical health and sustainability, a little bit in technology. NSF and NIH are our other two areas, other two funding agencies that we're going to look at data from. NSF, many of you know all about it. We're going to look at 585 grants that were funded and unfunded from the NIH, from a single university that gave us their grants of their faculty from the year 2007 to 2019. And essentially anonymize the information in it. And then the NIH, probably most relevant to the grants that people here apply for. We're going to look at about 3,000 of those, also from a single university, a top 10 research university in the US, and they're going to be focusing on medical sciences. From all three grants, we have all the text. We have lots of data on the main applicants' features. How much have they published? What's their citation impact? How many grants have they applied for in the past to get a sense of their own success at writing grants? And then we're going to again use fixed effects for year, program area, grant type to control for things that we can't measure directly, but that we can control for if they're a fixed aspect of the grant or the PI. The methods. What we're going to do is we're going to have three outcome variables, funded or not. Is it the grant, how innovative is the grant, and the grant citation impact. We're going to go through all the grants, and we're going to simply count up the number of promotional words that are used in the grant based on that dictionary of 139 promotional words that have been validated. And then we're going to look at the percentage of promotional words relative to all the words in the grant. We're going to have 13 control variables. Again, these data set are very rich, allow us to control for a lot of potential confounds. We're going to be looking at things like writing scores and writing samples. Writing scores and writing styles. Lots of features on the PI, lots of features on the grant itself, program features, and year. And then finally, we're going to use fixed effects regressions and some computer experiments, which I'll talk about at the end. So let's get to the findings. First thing I want to show you is the relationship between the percentage of promotional words in a grant and the probability that the grant is funded. The x-axis is the percentage of promotional words. The average percentage of promotional words in our grants is 1%, which sounds trivial, but it's not. If you look at the length of a sentence in a grant and the overall number of words in a grant, what you find is that at 1% promotional words, a promotional words occurs every 4 sentences, which is relatively frequent. And if you look at only the beginning of the grant and the end of the grant, which is what most people pay attention to in terms of being hooked hooked on the ideas of the grant, then promotional words occur every 3 sentences. So at 1%, you're still looking at quite a few promotional words. This dashed line is the base rate of acceptance of grants for the Novo Nordisk Foundation grant. So 17% of grants get funded. And what you can see here is that if you put in the average number of promotional words at 1%, you're still below the base rate. You actually have to put in about 1.5 times the average to just get to the base rate of being funded. But if you put in more after that, your probability of increasing your probability of increased funding goes up by over 40%. So promotional words can really help. These are margins plots, so it's basically the relationship between X and Y, holding constant the other variables. If I then look at 17% lift is what promotional words can give you. If I then look at NIH and NSF grants put together, we wind up finding a very similar relationship, although the distribution is about the same in the center if you look at the X variable on promotional words, but we do have some we do have much sparser data after about 2%. Nonetheless, if we only run the regression on where the data is not sparse, we wind up finding a very similar relationship. So right away, promotional words are positively related to whether you get funded or not, and they're highly predictive. Now let's look at innovativeness. Again, we're looking at this idea of putting novel ideas together is what makes you innovative. Here's a simple scatter plot that I'm going to show you. Number of promotional words, novelty score, and what you can see is as the number of promotional words goes up, so does the novelty score of the underlying novelty of the grant, which suggests that when scientists use promotional language, they are in fact trying to use it or are using it to represent more novel ideas. If we then look at this in terms of our margins plot, so it's this plot on the left, which is a scatter plot, plus all the controls I talked about. What you can see is, again, there's a very strong and significant relationship between the percentage of promotional words you use in a grant and its true underlying novelty. So not only does promotional language predict whether you get the grant or not funded, it's also predicting its true underlying novelty. So it appears that promotional words are not hype, but they really are representing something of substance. Let's look at citation impact. For citation impact, I'm going to show you 3 variables. I'm going to show you the average journal impact factor of published papers. I'm going to show you the highest journal impact factor of published papers, and I'm going to look at productivity. Why do we use journal impact factors? Because many of these grants are so recent, the papers written from them haven't had time to acquire citations directly, so we use journal impact factors, like many other researchers have, as a proxy for the paper's ultimate number of citations. So left plot is average citation impact, middle box is max citation impact, and the right plot is productivity. What you can see here is X variable is percentage of promotional words across all 3 outcome variables. Y-axis is increasing strength in terms of increasing levels of average citation, max citation, and productivity. In all cases, there is a significant and strong relationship between the percentage of promotional words in the grant when it's applied and the citation impact of the papers that come out of it. So promotional language is not only helping you get the grant, it's not only telling you about its novelty, but it's giving you a leading indicator of how the publications from that grant are likely to do in the market. Now, are there any mechanisms occurring here that we can begin to look at? This is a pretty new area, and we don't know a lot about the mechanisms by which this works. As I mentioned earlier, linguists think that promotional language is language that can help the reader engage their own evaluation of the material, draw attention to that material, and make that material more memorable. We don't know if this actually happens when promotional language is used in grants. So what we wanted to do was construct an experiment that could help us potentially understand what the mechanisms are by which promotional language works. And to do this, we did the following. We went into all our grants and we substituted promotional words in the grant for neutral synonyms. So if we go all the way back to the thing I talked about in the beginning, if we have the word crucial, we replace it with the word important or some other synonym of crucial that essentially is neutral. It does not have a promotional effect on cognition, according to theory. We do this by taking different percentages of promotional words out of grants. We start by taking 20% out, then we take out, we take out 20%, then we take out 50%, we take out 80%, etc. And each time that we do this, we reevaluate the sentiment or cognitive engagement level of the grant. The idea being that if we had grants that where we know what their sentiment level is based on what was observed in the submitted grant and compare it to a grant where everything else is the same except the promotional word has been replaced with a neutral synonym, would the overall sentiment of that grant change? So it's a very basic analysis. We're not claiming that this is what human beings do, but it does lay a groundwork for doing more careful empirical tests using human beings and grants. So let me show you what the findings are. Again, expectation is promotional words evoke more cognitive attention than their neutral synonyms. So what we're going to do is we're going to do basically a substitution experiment using natural language processing. In the experiment, we randomly replace promotional words with one of their neutral synonyms in the following proportions: 5%, 10%, 15%, and then 20% intervals. Because this is random changes and every promotional word has a number of potential synonyms. In fact, for the 139 promotional words, there are over 1,000 neutral synonyms. We do multiple replacements of every promotional word with a different synonym and then recalculate the change in cognitive engagement. And then we look at the score before and after. To do this, we use something called CyBERT, which is a neural network that uses embeddings to give you the context level interpretation of a promotional word. So for instance, why do I say contextual level? A promotional word could be first. It's the first to do something. It's an original. Or first can simply be that it's the first in a series of steps. CyBERT knows when it's looking at first as an original, something new and different, or whether it's looking at it just in steps by looking at the context of the sentence. So we're trying to control for those outcomes. The actual experiment is we look at the unique, we take a sentence like this: further, a unique and key aspect of the program, with both two highlighted words, unique and key, are promotional words according to the dictionary, and we replace it with further, a specific and central aspect of the program, which are two neutral synonyms, and then we recalculate the grant. And here's what we find. These bars represent the percentage of grants that drop in engagement when you do a replacement of promotional words with their synonyms. So at 25% removal, over 60% of the grants will be dropping in their cognitive engagement. So you take out 25% of a grant's promotional language and it's cognitive, and 60% of those grants that had that 25% taken out are going to lose cognitive engagement. If we bump it up to 50%, 75 or 72% here are going to lose their engagement, and so on and so forth. It gets worse the more you take out. Now, one of the things to see here is we have generalization again. If you look at the NMF or the NSF or the NIH grants, they all follow the same pattern. If you take promotional language out of the grant, the cognitive engagement as rated by this algorithm goes down. The assumption being that if the algorithm says that the cognitive engagement goes down, it could hypothetically mean that the cognitive engagement of a reviewer for the grant would do the same thing. We don't know if that's true or not, but we're hoping that these very powerful and consistent findings can lay the groundwork for people who want to do experiments using real people. So where does this leave us? Conclusions. I started by talking about production and promotion of scientific knowledge. Thinking about the production of it, we focused on gender diverse teams and saw that they had a consistent impact both on the novelty of work being produced by the team and on the citation impact. I also wanted to look at how you communicate these novel ideas, and with that, we looked at promotional language. We find that promotional language is related to 3 important outcome variables of grant success. It turns out that these relationships are quite robust, controlling for year, grant type of field, controlling for the funding agency, controlling for PI features, all of these things and more, the results hold. And then possibly a mechanism to think about this is that cognition and attention are activated by promotional language in a grant. With that, I'd like to say thank you very much. And if you had to carry a couple of things away and start putting them into practice, start thinking about making teams that are gender diverse and understanding how to use promotional language to get others to see the merits of your good ideas. With that, I'd like to say thank you on my behalf and behalf of my co-authors and the other people in my lab. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian, for your informative presentation. We will now start the Q&A portion of the webinar. If you have a question you'd like to ask, please do so now. Just submit a question in the Ask a Question box located at the bottom of your screen. Let's go ahead and get started. Our first question that we have here says, thank you for the informative and inspiring presentation. You noted that your findings have inspired other study researchers to increase their diversity. How did you discover this?
One of the things that I do in my work here at the university is I go into science organizations and I give them training on how to better run teams and organize and create and manage and build their networks. And one of the pieces of feedback that I get is that the studies that have been done by my group on gender diverse teams have already been adopted and people are seeing the positive aspects of them. So I do not have a large systematic study to know if it's being adopted more, but I do have good anecdotal evidence that people are in fact using this information to better organize their teams.
Fantastic, thank you. Our next question that we have here says, you discussed gender diverse groups having a greater level of productivity compared to non-gender diverse groups. Can I ask what aspects other than gender that could be evaluated for future studies?
So if we go back, I'm going to go back to a slide here real quick. I'm going to push this to audience. I hope I did this correctly.
Yes, you did.
Okay, so let me come down here. So, people have been looking at, what can you do to improve the productivity of teams? And again, in this study, I didn't look at productivity per se. I looked at novelty and impact. If you look at these control variables, these are all things that have already been researched by researchers in trying to improve the success of science teams. So the size of the team, the diversity of the team, internationalization, career age, gender, so on and so forth. We just looked at gender. You'd want to find something that isn't already in this list if you wanted to find something new. One thing that comes to mind that's been very hard to do research on is interdisciplinarity. And one of the reasons interdisciplinarity has been so hard to do research on is it's hard to measure in lots and lots of data. So if someone were to look at me and see that my primary appointment is in a business school, because you can get that from the author's listing and their affiliations, people might think that my PhD, my discipline, is in business, but in fact, it's in sociology. And so one of the things that could really help here would be to have better measures of interdisciplinarity and to use that in a paper. I think that would be very valuable. Another area that I think would be very valuable is to look at ethnicity. Science has not only become more diverse in terms of gender, it's become more diverse in terms of ethnicity. But again, ethnicity has been very hard to measure in large data because, unlike gender, which you can infer with better accuracy just from someone's first name, ethnicity tries to be inferred from last names. And in a world of immigration and in a world of marriage, using people's last names creates a lot of error. So again, better measures of interdisciplinarity or ethnicity would be areas that I would look to do the next step in this research on what makes teams more powerful in science.
Wonderful. Thank you. All right. Our next question here says, do you think that use of promotional words might be boasting the ideas and outcomes?
So in the data that we looked at, I'd say no. The reason I don't think it's boasting the outcomes is that promotional language correlate the percentage of promotional language in a grant does in fact correlate highly with the true novelty and innovativeness of the grant. So boasting would be where you use promotional language for, in my mind, for essentially conventional ideas to hype them. But there isn't hype going on here because the ideas actually are more innovative and more novel. Now that's in our group of grants. It may be that in some other grants there is some hype, but I can't speak to that because I haven't seen it. My guess is that scientists are a very conservative group, and they know they don't want to push ideas or hype ideas because they can just as easily be rejected by reviewers for doing such a thing. So they tend to be careful about that. And I also think that, in science, trust is a very important part of producing valid um, and good research. And because of that, I think people would also be truthful in using promotional language to reflect what they think are the true underlying um, qualities of their ideas. I would add one other thing to this question because, when I saw that, I worried a lot about people starting to use promotional language just to hype things. Um, and that is, we looked at grants. And you shouldn't necessarily believe that the relationship we find between promotional language and grants would generalize to promotional language and scientific papers or promotional language and patents. And the reason for that is that, grants are designed to fund, ideas that are aspirational, ideas that can be big and different. Um, by contrast, scientific papers and patents are ones that are really designed to show conservatively a proof of concept. And I think what we find for grants and the relationship between grants and promotional language, we wouldn't find for papers and patents. We might find that there's a negative relationship in scientific papers between promotional language and getting the paper published. And it's something that we're currently working on in the lab using data on successful and rejected papers to know whether that's true or not. I'm looking forward to finding out more about how promotional language works there.
Excellent. Thank you. And it looks like we have time for one more question, so I will ask this one of you. What future studies are underway for anything you've discussed?
Oh, so I kind of just answered that one. We are looking at promotional language in papers, and we're looking at promotional language in patents. The paper study, I think, is going to be quite exciting. It's over 80,000 papers from a well-known medical journal. And the beauty of this is it's not just the papers that were published, it's papers in every stage of review, including the original papers that were rejected at the desk. So again, we're overcoming the sample selection bias. And in patent data, um, again, very important in the medical fields, we're looking at over 6.5 million patents in in uh, from the U.S. Patent Office, and we're looking at how promotional language operates in patents as well. So we'll have much more information on this. In terms of diversity in teams, another area where team diversity is important is in patenting, and it's been known for a very long time that women patent at much lower rates than men do. And we wanted to better understand what was happening in patents in relation to the gender of teams. And we found a couple of very interesting things that I think are worth mentioning. And that is that many people have assumed that gender, that the lower grant rate of women inventors is due to stereotypes about women being less innovative than men. Men are mavericks, women, are followers when it comes to innovation. This is kind of like the idea of the stereotype in the patent industry. And we just felt that that was not correct. And getting into the data, we saw some very interesting things that aren't related to stereotypes, but really related to the institutional structure by which innovation is evaluated and how that influences women innovators. And what we learned was one, that in the case of patents, women are incidentally evaluated by women examiners more than they're evaluated by men examiners. And in fact, this is some data that shows inconsistently you wouldn't expect women to have negative stereotypes of women examiners to have negative stereotypes of women inventors. And with that, what we looked at was the experience of women examiners. And what we found is that in the patent office, women examiners have much lower experience than men examiners, which means that when women inventors are evaluated, they're being evaluated by a lower experience group of examiners than are men. And lower experience examiners tend to be ones that are much more conservative in making their patenting decisions, which means that part of what's holding women back in terms of this really important area of innovation and patents is not entirely around stereotypes. It may not be mostly around stereotypes. It's around the institutional structure of the evaluation process, where women tend to be evaluated by less experienced evaluators. And because they lack experience, they tend to make more mistakes, and they tend to be more conservative in granting patents to innovations that are more novel but potentially higher impact. So we're trying to understand this process better in terms of what is it in the innovation process and in institutional structures that inhibit innovation from the point of view of men and women innovators.
Excellent. Thank you, Brian. Before we go, do you have any final comments for our audience?
Um, just that, thank you very, very much for your time today and for inviting me here. Very much enjoyed sharing my ideas with you. And if you have any questions, do feel free to reach out. I'd be happy to answer your questions online. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you again, Brian Uzzi, for your time today and your important research. Before we go, I'd like to thank the audience for joining us today and for their interesting questions. Questions that we did not have time for today and those submitted during the on-demand period will be addressed by our speaker via the contact information you provided at the time of registration. This webcast can be viewed on demand for 1 year until March 6th, 2025. LabRoots will alert you via email when it's available for replay. We encourage you to share that email with your colleagues who may have missed today's live event. Until next time, take care, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.